Derek Matthews walked down the busy street in New Angeles, Mars colony, with his hand resting on his plasma weapon. The red dust from the Martian surface had settled on his dark blue uniform, but he did not care. He hated this part of the city. Too many different kinds of people lived here. People from Africa, Asia, South America, and all the other places on Earth that he wished would just disappear. Matthews had been a police officer for 15 years. He started on Earth in a small town where everyone looked like him. When the government offered him a job on Mars with better pay, he took it without thinking about what kind of place it would be. Now he regretted that choice every single day. The street was full of humans who had come from different parts of Earth and the other colonies. Some had dark skin, some had light skin, some spoke different languages. Matthews believed that only people who looked like him deserved respect. He thought the others were lazy, dangerous, and did not belong in his world. His supervisor, Captain Ron Blake, shared the same views. Blake made sure that complaints about Matthews never reached the higher offices. When people reported Matthews for being rude or unfair, Blake would throw the reports in the trash. Blake told Matthews that they needed to stick together against all these different people who were taking over their jobs and their neighborhoods. Matthews walked past a small shop where an old man from India was selling spices. The smell made Matthews angry. He did not like anything that reminded him that he was not back on Earth in his small town. He stared at the old man with hate in his eyes, but he did not stop. He had bigger plans today. 3 blocks away, Judge Carlos Rivera was walking slowly, down the same street. Rivera was a federal circuit judge who worked on Europa Station, one of the moons around Jupiter. He was visiting Mars colony to see how the different human communities were living together. Rivera had dark skin and came from a family that had moved to the African colonial settlements 3 generations ago. Rivera wore simple clothes, not his judge robes. He wanted to see the real life of the people, not how they acted when they knew a judge was watching. He had been walking for 2 hours, talking to shop owners, children playing in the street, and families going about their daily lives. Rivera was impressed by what he saw. Humans from all different backgrounds were working together, helping each other, and building a new kind of society on Mars. Children with different skin colors played together. Adults from different countries shared ideas and solved problems as a team. This was what humanity could be when it worked together. Rivera stopped in front of a small restaurant. Through the window, he could see a family eating together. The father looked like he came from Mexico, the mother from Japan, and their children were a beautiful mix of both. They were laughing and sharing food. Rivera smiled. This was why he became a judge, to protect this kind of life for all humans. Matthews continued his patrol, getting angrier with each step. He passed a group of teenagers who were speaking Spanish and laughing. He wanted to arrest them just for being happy. He passed a woman in colorful African clothes carrying her baby. He wanted to stop her and search her bags for no reason, but he controlled himself. He was looking for the right target, someone he could intimidate without getting in trouble. Rivera decided to sit on a bench and watch the people walk by. He pulled out his small computer and started writing notes about what he had seen. He wanted to share this positive report with other judges across the human colonies. Mars colony was proof that humans could live together peacefully, no matter where they came from or what they looked like. A group of children ran past Rivera, chasing a small robot toy. One child tripped and fell near the bench. Rivera quickly helped the boy stand up and brush the dust off his clothes. The child thanked him in broken English mixed with some other language. Rivera patted the boy's head and sent him on his way. Matthews saw this interaction from across the street. His anger grew stronger. He saw a dark-skinned man touching a child, and his racist mind immediately created evil thoughts. He did not see a kind judge helping a hurt child. He saw what his prejudice wanted him to see. Matthews started walking toward Rivera. His hand moved closer to his weapon. He had found his target for the day. Someone he could harass, someone he could make feel small and afraid. Matthews believed that people like Rivera needed to be reminded of their place in society. Rivera did not notice Matthews approaching. He was too busy writing his notes and watching the beautiful community around him. He had no idea that in a few minutes his peaceful observation would turn into a situation that would change everything. The sun was setting over New Angeles, casting long shadows on the street. The red Martian sky was beautiful, but Matthews did not see beauty in anything anymore. His heart was full of hate, and that hate was about to destroy his entire life. Rivera closed his computer and stood up from the bench. He decided to walk a few more blocks before returning to his hotel. He wanted to see more of this wonderful community. He had no idea that evil was walking straight toward him, wearing a police uniform and carrying a gun. The two men were about to meet, and their meeting would become a story told across all the human colonies for years to come. It would be a story about hate and justice, about the old ways and the new ways, about one man's prejudice and humanity's progress. Rivera walked down the street when he heard someone calling for help. An elderly woman was standing next to her broken hover cart, looking confused and worried. Her groceries were scattered on the ground, and the cart was making strange beeping sounds. Rivera immediately went to help her. The woman was old and frail, with white hair and kind eyes. She spoke with an accent that Rivera recognized as coming from one of the European colonies. "My cart just stopped working," the woman said sadly. "I do not know what to do. My home is too far to walk, and these groceries are too heavy for me to carry." Rivera smiled at her. "Do not worry. Let me see if I can fix it." He knelt down and looked at the hover cart's control panel. Rivera was not an engineer, but he had learned some basic repair skills during his years traveling between different colonies. The problem was simple. A wire had come loose from the power source. Rivera carefully connected it back to its proper place. The cart stopped beeping and started floating properly again. "There you go," Rivera said, standing up and dusting off his hands. "It should work fine now." The elderly woman was so happy that tears came to her eyes. "Thank you so much, young man. You are very kind. God bless you." Rivera helped her put the groceries back in the cart. As they worked together, they talked about life on Mars Colony. The woman told him about her grandchildren and how proud she was that they were growing up in a world where people helped each other regardless of their differences. Matthews had been watching this interaction from across the street. His racist mind twisted what he saw into something evil. He convinced himself that Rivera was probably stealing from the old woman or planning to hurt her. Matthews could not believe that a person with dark skin would help someone without bad intentions. Matthews walked across the street with heavy, angry steps. His boots made loud sounds on the pavement. His hand was resting on his weapon, and his face was twisted with hate and suspicion. "Hey, you," Matthews called out in a loud, rude voice. "Step away from that woman right now." Rivera looked up, surprised. He saw a police officer approaching them with an aggressive attitude. Rivera remained calm, as he always did in difficult situations. Years of being a judge had taught him how to handle tense moments with patience and wisdom. "Good evening, officer," Rivera said politely. "I was just helping this lady with her broken cart." "I did not ask for your life story," Matthews snapped. "I said step away from her now." The elderly woman looked confused and frightened. "Officer, this nice man helped me fix my cart. He did nothing wrong." Matthews ignored her completely. His attention was focused entirely on Rivera, who remained standing calmly with his hands visible and his voice respectful. "Show me your identification," Matthews demanded, "and keep your hands where I can see them." Rivera slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his identification card. He handed it to Matthews without making any sudden movements. Rivera had experienced this kind of treatment before in his life, especially when he was younger. He knew that staying calm was the best way to handle ignorant people. Matthews looked at the identification card with suspicion. It clearly stated that Rivera was a federal circuit judge, but Matthews refused to believe it. In his racist mind, people with dark skin could not hold important positions in government. "This is fake," Matthews said, throwing the card back at Rivera. "Where did you steal this from?" Rivera picked up his identification card calmly. "Officer, that identification is real. I am Judge Carlos Rivera from Europa Station. You can verify this by contacting the federal court system." Do not lie to me, Matthews shouted, getting angrier. People like you do not become judges. You probably stole this from some real judge and think you can fool me. The elderly woman was now very frightened. She had never seen a police officer act this way. Other people on the street were starting to notice the commotion. Some stopped to watch while others quickly walked away, afraid of getting involved. Rivera remained perfectly calm. Officer, I understand there may be some confusion. If you contact your supervisor or the courthouse, they can confirm my identity within minutes. Matthews was getting more and more angry. Rivera's calm attitude made him feel foolish, which only increased his rage. In Matthews's twisted mind, Rivera's politeness was a sign of disrespect, not good manners. I do not need to contact anyone, Matthews said through gritted teeth. I know what you are. You are just another criminal trying to trick me with fake papers. Rivera realized that this officer was not going to listen to reason. He had dealt with prejudiced people before, but never while wearing civilian clothes and never with someone who had a gun and a badge. Rivera started to worry, not for himself but for the innocent people around them who might get hurt. Officer, may I ask your name and badge number? Rivera asked politely. I would like to file a formal complaint about this interaction. This question made Matthews explode with fury. No one had ever asked him for his badge number, especially not someone he considered beneath him. In his small mind, this was the ultimate insult. You want my badge number? Matthews screamed. I will show you my badge number, right after I show you what happens to people who disrespect police officers. Rivera saw the dangerous look in Matthews' eyes and knew that the situation was about to get much worse. He looked around and noticed that several people were now watching them. Some had their phones out and were recording everything that was happening. Matthews was too blinded by his hate and anger to notice the crowd that was gathering. He was focused only on Rivera, the man he wanted to humiliate and hurt. Matthews had no idea that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his entire life. Matthews stepped closer to Rivera, his face red with anger and hate. The elderly woman backed away, clutching her cart and looking terrified. She had never seen such aggression from someone who was supposed to protect people. Officer, please, calm down, Rivera said in his steady, judicial voice. There is no need for this hostility. I am simply asking to contact the courthouse to verify my credentials. Calm down, Matthews screamed. You do not tell me to calm down. You people come here thinking you own the place, thinking you can tell real Americans what to do. Rivera felt a familiar pain in his heart. Even in the year 2387, even with humanity spread across the solar system, some people still carried the old hatreds. But Rivera had spent his entire career fighting these attitudes through the law and justice system. Officer, I am also an American, Rivera said quietly. My family has served this country for generations. I have dedicated my life to upholding justice for all humans, regardless of their background. This statement made Matthews even angrier. He could not accept that someone who looked like Rivera could be more American than he was. In Matthews's twisted worldview, only people who looked like him could be true patriots. You are not American, Matthews shouted. You are just another immigrant pretending to belong here. Well, I have news for you. This is my planet, my colony, and my street. The crowd around them was growing larger. People from all different backgrounds were watching, in shock as a police officer verbally attacked an innocent man. Some were recording everything with their neural implants, devices that could instantly transmit video to anywhere in the solar system. Rivera noticed something that Matthews was too angry to see. A small light on Rivera's jacket was blinking, red. This was his judicial emergency beacon, a device that all federal judges carried. When a judge felt threatened or witnessed serious misconduct, the beacon would automatically activate and alert the Federal Justice Network. The beacon had been broadcasting Rivera's location and the entire conversation to courthouses across the solar system for the past 5 minutes. Every word Matthews spoke was being recorded and analyzed by the most advanced legal computers humanity had ever built. Officer, I strongly suggest you contact your supervisor immediately, Rivera said, trying one last time to prevent the situation from getting worse. This incident is being recorded and transmitted to federal authorities. Matthews looked at the blinking light on Rivera's jacket, but he was too ignorant to understand what it meant. He thought it was just some kind of cheap electronic toy. "Oh, you have a little light," Matthews said with cruel laughter. "Is that supposed to scare me? Let me show you something that should scare you." Matthews reached for his plasma weapon and pulled it from its holster. The weapon hummed with deadly energy as he pointed it directly at Rivera's chest. The crowd around them gasped and stepped back. The elderly woman screamed. "This is what happens to people who disrespect police officers," Matthews said, his voice full of hate. "This is what happens to your kind when you forget your place." Rivera did not move or show any fear. He had faced death threats before in his career as a judge. Some of the most dangerous criminals in the solar system had threatened to kill him, but he had never backed down from doing what was right. "Officer, you are pointing a weapon at a federal judge," Rivera said calmly. "This is a serious crime that will destroy your career and send you to prison for many years." Matthews laughed again, but it was the laugh of a man who had lost all control of his emotions. "Federal judge," he mocked. "You are nothing but a lying criminal with fake identification. No one will believe your word against mine." What Matthews did not know was that his words were being heard by hundreds of judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials across the human colonies. The Federal Justice Network's emergency system had identified Rivera within seconds and classified this as a Class A federal incident. On Europa Station, Chief Justice Maria Santos was in a meeting when her emergency alert system activated. She immediately stopped the meeting and watched the live feed from Rivera's judicial beacon. Her face went pale as she saw one of her most respected colleagues being threatened by a racist police officer. On Earth, in the Global Justice Center, alarms were sounding as dozens of officials rushed to their computers to watch the unfolding crisis. The head of internal affairs for colonial law enforcement was already preparing emergency transport to Mars Colony. On Luna Base, the Federal Marshal Service was mobilizing rapid response teams. 3 shuttles were being prepared for immediate departure to Mars Colony, each carrying federal marshals with full authority to arrest any local officer who threatened a federal judge. But Matthews knew none of this. He was lost in his own world of hate and ignorance, believing that he could intimidate Rivera without consequences. He pressed the weapon closer to Rivera's chest. "Get on your knees," Matthews commanded. "I want everyone to see what happens to people like you when they cross me." Rivera remained standing. "I will not kneel to hatred and ignorance," he said firmly. "I have sworn an oath to uphold justice, and I will not break that oath even in the face of death." The crowd around them had grown to more than 50 people. Humans from every background and every part of Earth were watching this confrontation. Some were crying, some were angry, but all of them were recording everything they saw. Matthews was too blinded by his racism to notice that the crowd was united against him. People who had never met before were standing together, holding hands, creating a human chain of solidarity around Rivera. Children were hiding behind their parents, but the adults stood firm. "Look at all your friends," Matthews said mockingly. "They cannot help you now. No one can help you. This is my world. And in my world, people like you do what they are told." Rivera looked at the crowd and felt a deep sense of pride in humanity. Despite the hatred of one ignorant man, dozens of good people were standing together to witness injustice and demand accountability. This was the humanity he had devoted his life to serving. The red light on Rivera's beacon was now blinking faster, indicating that federal response teams were en route. Justice was coming to Mars Colony, and it was coming fast. Sergeant Lisa Park was finishing her patrol 3 blocks away when her radio exploded with urgent messages. Multiple calls were coming in about an officer threatening a civilian with a weapon. The location was in Matthews' patrol area, which made her stomach drop with worry. Park had been a police officer for 12 years, and she knew Matthews was trouble. She had filed several complaints about his behavior, but Captain Blake always dismissed them. Park suspected that Blake and Matthews shared the same racist views, but she had never been able to prove it. Park drove her hover car as fast as safely possible through the busy streets. As she got closer to the scene, she could see a large crowd gathered in a circle. People were shouting and pointing, This was not good. When Park arrived, she pushed through the crowd and saw the worst thing she could imagine. Matthews was pointing his plasma weapon at a man in civilian clothes while screaming racial slurs. The civilian was standing calmly, showing no fear, which only seemed to make Matthews angrier. Park looked more closely at the civilian and felt her heart stop. She recognized that face immediately. It was Judge Carlos Rivera, one of the most respected federal judges in the entire solar system. Park had seen his picture in law enforcement magazines and training materials dozens of times. Judge Rivera was famous throughout the colonial law enforcement community. He was known for being fair but firm, intelligent but compassionate. He had written several important legal decisions that protected the rights of police officers while also holding them accountable for misconduct. Every honest cop in the solar system respected him. Park drew her own weapon, but she pointed it at Matthews, not at Rivera. "Matthews, put your weapon down immediately," she shouted. "That is a direct order." Matthews looked at Park with surprise and anger. "Stay out of this, Park. This criminal is resisting arrest and threatening me with fake identification." "Matthews, you idiot," Park said, her voice full of shock and fear. "That is Judge Carlos Rivera. You are pointing a gun at a federal judge." Matthews looked back at Rivera with confusion. The name meant nothing to him because he had never paid attention during training sessions about federal law and important officials. Matthews had always believed that such information was useless because he never planned to deal with important people. "I do not care what his name is," Matthews said stubbornly. "He is just another criminal trying to fool me with fake papers." Park realized that Matthews was too ignorant and too blinded by hate to understand the magnitude of his mistake. She tried a different approach. "Matthews, look around you," Park said desperately. "Look at all these people recording you. This is being broadcast across the entire solar system. Every cop, every judge, every government official is watching you right now." For the first time, Matthews looked at the crowd around him. He saw dozens of people holding up phones and recording devices. He saw neural implants blinking with transmission lights. But even then, he was too stupid and too proud to understand what this meant. "I do not care who is watching," Matthews said loudly. "People need to see what happens when criminals try to impersonate federal officials." Rivera spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Sergeant Park, thank you for trying to defuse this situation. Officer Matthews has been threatening me for the past 15 minutes because he refuses to believe my identification is real." Park recognized Rivera's voice from legal training videos. It was definitely him. There was no doubt in her mind that Matthews was committing career suicide in front of hundreds of witnesses. "Judge Rivera, I sincerely apologize for this officer's behavior," Park said formally. "Sir, federal marshals are probably already on their way. Your judicial beacon has been active for quite some time." Rivera nodded. "Yes, Sergeant. The Federal Justice Network activated emergency protocols several minutes ago. I estimate that federal response teams will arrive within the next few minutes." Matthews was starting to realize that something was wrong, but his pride and racism prevented him from backing down. "You are both crazy," he said. "This guy is not a judge. Look at him. Judges do not look like that." Park felt sick to her stomach. Matthews was not just committing a crime, he was doing it for the most disgusting reasons possible. His racism was about to destroy not just his own career, but potentially the reputation of their entire department. "Matthews, for the last time, put your weapon down," Park ordered. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life." "The only mistake I am making is listening to you," Matthews replied. "You have always been too soft on these people. Maybe you need to learn the same lesson he is about to learn." Park realized with horror that Matthews was now threatening her too. He had completely lost control of his emotions and his judgment. She activated her own emergency beacon, requesting immediate backup from every available unit. The crowd around them had grown to more than 100 people. Word was spreading through the neighborhood that a police officer was threatening a federal judge. People were coming from shops, restaurants, and homes to witness this historic confrontation. What struck Park most was the composition of the crowd. There were humans from every ethnic background, every economic level, every age group. They were all standing together, united in their opposition to Matthew's behavior. Old and young, rich and poor, every color and culture represented on Mars Colony was present. A teenage girl near the front of the crowd shouted, "Shame on you." An elderly man called out, "This is not who we are." A mother holding her child said, "My daughter should not have to see this hatred." Matthews looked at all these people with contempt. In his twisted mind, they were all enemies of his version of America. He could not see that they were actually the best of America, the dream of what humanity could become when it rejected hate and embraced unity. Rivera remained calm throughout all of this chaos. He had seen racism before, but never quite so public, and never quite so self-destructive. Matthews was destroying himself in front of the entire human civilization, and he was too ignorant to realize it. Park checked her watch. Federal marshals should be arriving any minute. When they did, Matthews's career would be over instantly. She wondered if there was any way to save him from himself, but she was beginning to think it was too late. The red light on Rivera's beacon was now blinking so fast it looked almost solid. This meant that federal response teams were very close. Justice was about to arrive on Mars Colony, and it was going to be swift and final. In the Federal Justice Center on Europa Station, Chief Justice Maria Santos watched the live feed from Rivera's judicial beacon with growing alarm. She had known Carlos Rivera for 15 years, and he was one of the finest judges she had ever worked with. Seeing him threatened by a racist police officer filled her with both anger and determination. Santos immediately activated the Federal Justice Network's emergency response protocol. Within seconds, her commands were being transmitted to law enforcement agencies across the solar system. This was not just an attack on one judge, it was an attack on the entire human justice system. The Federal Justice Network was humanity's greatest achievement in law enforcement. It connected every courthouse, police station, and legal office, from Earth to the outer colonies. When a federal judge was threatened, the entire network responded as one unified system. On Luna Base, Federal Marshal Commander Helen Brooks received the emergency alert while reviewing case files. She looked at her computer screen and saw Rivera's face along with a red priority flag that meant immediate response required. Brooks had served as a federal marshal for 20 years, and she had never seen a Class A federal emergency involving a sitting judge. Brooks immediately dispatched 3 rapid response teams to Mars Colony. Each team consisted of highly trained federal marshals with full authority to arrest any local officer who interfered with federal law. The fastest ships in the Federal Marshal Service were launched within 4 minutes of the initial alert. Meanwhile, the Federal Justice Network's artificial intelligence systems were conducting the most thorough background investigation in law enforcement history. Every action Matthews had ever taken as a police officer was being analyzed by computers that could process millions of data points per second. The results were shocking even to experienced investigators. Matthews had been the subject of 47 civilian complaints during his 15-year career. 38 of those complaints involved accusations of racial profiling or discriminatory behavior. All of these complaints had been dismissed or buried by his supervisors. The AI systems also discovered a pattern of suspicious activity in Matthews' arrest records. He had arrested people of color at a rate 5 times higher than his fellow officers. His use of force reports showed excessive violence against minorities, while showing unusual restraint with white suspects. But the most damning discovery was a series of text messages between Matthews and Captain Blake. The messages contained racial slurs, jokes about hurting minorities, and explicit discussions about how to avoid punishment for discriminatory behavior. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the head of Internal Affairs for Colonial Law Enforcement, was reviewing these findings from her office on Earth. She had seen corrupt officers before, but the scope of Matthews' misconduct was extraordinary. Even worse was the evidence that his supervisors had actively protected him. Walsh immediately issued arrest warrants for Matthews, Captain Blake, and 2 other supervisors who had covered up complaints. She also ordered a complete investigation of the entire Mars Colony Police Department. This was going to be the largest corruption investigation in colonial law enforcement history. On Mars Colony, The emergency response was already beginning. Local police units from across the city were rushing to Matthews' location, but they were not coming to help him. They were coming to arrest him on federal charges. Detective Sam Miller had been monitoring police radio traffic when he heard about the situation. Miller was one of the honest cops in the department, and he had always suspected that Matthews was corrupt. Now he was driving as fast as possible to the scene, hoping to arrive before Matthews did something that could not be undone. The Federal Justice Network's computers were also analyzing the crowd around Rivera. Facial recognition software identified each person in the crowd and confirmed that they were all law-abiding citizens with no criminal records. The AI systems noted that the crowd included people from 23 different ethnic backgrounds, all standing together in opposition to Matthews' racism. This information was being compiled into a real-time report that was being sent to judges and law enforcement officials across the solar system. Within an hour, this incident would be studied by every police academy and law school in human space as an example of both the worst and best of humanity. Judge Patricia Johnson was reviewing the case from her chambers on Titan Station. Johnson was known for her expertise in civil rights law, and she was already preparing legal briefs that would ensure Matthews faced the maximum penalties allowed under federal law. The charges against Matthews were mounting by the minute. Threatening a federal judge was a Class A felony that carried a minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. Adding weapons charges, civil rights violations, and abuse of authority under color of law meant that Matthews was looking at life in prison. But the Federal Justice Network was not just focused on punishment. The system was also designed to prevent future incidents. Within minutes of the initial alert, new training protocols were being developed and distributed to every police department in the solar system. The incident was also triggering automatic reviews of every officer who had worked with Matthews or Blake. Any cop who had failed to report their misconduct would face disciplinary action. The message was clear: the era of protecting racist officers was over. On Earth, President Helen Davis was being briefed about the situation in the Oval Office. The president was known for her strong stance on civil rights, and she was already planning a public statement that would make clear that such behavior would not be tolerated anywhere in human space. The Federal Justice Network's response was a perfect example of how humanity had evolved since the early 21st century. Instead of allowing local corruption to hide federal crimes, the system ensured that justice was swift, transparent, and absolute. Rivera's judicial beacon was now connecting him directly to Chief Justice Santos on Europa Station. Santos spoke to Rivera through his communication implant, asking if he was safe and assuring him that help was on the way. "Carlos, we are all watching," Santos said through the secure connection. "The entire justice system is responding. This officer has made the biggest mistake of his life." Rivera responded quietly, so Matthews could not hear him. "Maria, I am fine, but this incident shows we still have work to do. Some humans still carry the old hatreds." "Yes, but look at the crowd around you," Santos replied. "Look at how many people are standing with you. That is the real humanity, Carlos. That racist cop represents the past. Those people represent our future." Rivera looked at the crowd and smiled despite the danger he was in. Santos was right. For every Matthews, there were hundreds of good people who believed in justice and equality. Humanity was winning the battle against hatred one generation at a time. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as multiple police vehicles converged on the scene. But these were not ordinary patrol cars coming to help Matthews. These were federal vehicles carrying officers who had been ordered to arrest him. Federal Marshal Jake Turner stepped out of the first vehicle that arrived. Turner was a tall, serious man who had been a federal marshal for 18 years. He had arrested corrupt politicians, crooked judges, and dirty cops across the solar system. But he had never dealt with someone stupid enough to threaten a federal judge in broad daylight. Turner surveyed the scene quickly. He saw Matthews pointing a plasma weapon at a civilian, while a crowd of more than 100 people watched in horror. He immediately recognized Rivera from federal law enforcement briefings. This was going to be the easiest arrest of his career. "Officer Matthews," Turner called out in a commanding voice. "I am Federal Marshal Jake Turner. You are pointing a weapon at a federal judge. Lower your weapon immediately and step away." Matthews turned to look at Turner, confusion and anger mixing on his face. He had expected backup to help him deal with what he thought was a criminal with fake identification. Instead, more people were telling him he was wrong. "Marshal, this man is impersonating a federal judge," Matthews said desperately. "I caught him trying to scam an elderly woman with fake identification papers." Turner walked closer, his own weapon drawn, but pointed at the ground. His voice was calm but carried absolute authority. "Officer Matthews, the man you are threatening is Judge Carlos Rivera of the Federal Circuit Court. His identity has been verified by the Federal Justice Network. You are committing a federal crime." Park stepped forward to support Turner. "Marshal, I tried to tell him, but he would not listen. Officer Matthews has been threatening Judge Rivera for nearly 20 minutes. Turner nodded to Park, recognizing her as one of the honest officers in the department. He had read her file during the flight to Mars Colony. She had tried to report Matthews' misconduct multiple times only to be ignored by corrupt supervisors. "Judge Rivera," Turner said formally. "Are you injured, sir?" Rivera shook his head. "No, Marshal Turner. I am unharmed. However, Officer Matthews has made numerous threatening statements and has been pointing his weapon at me for an extended period." Turner's expression grew even more serious. Threatening a federal judge was bad enough, but doing it for an extended period showed premeditation and malice. Matthews was looking at decades in prison. "Officer Matthews, I am ordering you one final time to lower your weapon and surrender," Turner said. "If you do not comply, I will use whatever force is necessary to protect Judge Rivera." Matthews looked around wildly. He was surrounded by federal marshals, local police officers, and more than 100 civilians. All of them were looking at him with expressions of disgust and anger. For the first time, he began to realize that he might be in serious trouble. But Matthews's pride and racism were stronger than his survival instinct. He could not admit that he had been wrong about Rivera. In his twisted mind, all of these people were part of some conspiracy to protect a criminal who happened to have good fake identification. "I do not care what you people say," Matthews shouted. "I know what I see. This man is not a judge. Real judges do not look like him." The crowd around them gasped at this blatantly racist statement. Several people in the crowd started shouting at Matthews, calling him a disgrace to the police uniform. Parents covered their children's ears so they would not hear such hateful language. Turner had heard enough. He activated his arrest beacon, which immediately transmitted a live video feed to courts across the solar system. Every word Matthews spoke from this point forward would be recorded as evidence for his trial. "Officer Matthews, you have just made a racist statement in front of hundreds of witnesses while threatening a federal judge," Turner said coldly. "Your career is over. Your freedom is over. Surrender now, or I will take you down by force." Matthews looked at Rivera with pure hatred. Even facing arrest and imprisonment, he could not let go of his racist beliefs. "This is all your fault," he screamed at Rivera. "You and your kind are destroying everything good about America." Rivera finally spoke directly to Matthews for the first time since Turner arrived. His voice was calm, dignified, and filled with the authority of someone who had spent decades dispensing justice. "Officer Matthews, I have served America faithfully for 25 years, Rivera said. "I have dedicated my life to protecting the Constitution and ensuring justice for all citizens. You, on the other hand, have betrayed everything America stands for." These words hit Matthews harder than any physical blow could have. Deep down, he knew Rivera was right. Matthews had become everything that was wrong with law enforcement. He was a disgrace to his badge, his uniform, and his country. But instead of accepting responsibility for his actions, Matthews became even more enraged. He pressed his weapon closer to Rivera's chest, his finger moving toward the trigger. "You do not get to lecture me about America," Matthews screamed. "You are not even a real American." Turner saw Matthews' finger move toward the trigger and knew the situation had become immediately life-threatening. He raised his own weapon and aimed it at Matthews' head. "Final warning, Matthews," Turner said. "Drop your weapon now, or I will shoot you where you stand." The crowd held its breath. Children were crying. Adults were praying. Everyone knew they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered for generations. Rivera remained perfectly calm, even with a weapon pressed against his chest and a racist cop's finger on the trigger. His faith in the justice system and in the goodness of humanity kept him strong. "Officer Matthews," Rivera said quietly, "it is not too late to do the right thing. Put down your weapon and surrender. Do not throw your life away because of hatred." Matthews looked into Rivera's eyes and saw something he had never expected to see. He saw compassion. Despite everything Matthews had done, Rivera was still trying to save him from himself. For just a moment, Matthews hesitated. The human part of him, the part that had been buried under years of hatred and ignorance, tried to break through. Maybe he could put down the weapon. Maybe he could surrender. Maybe he could try to become a better person. But then his racist programming took control again. He could not accept help or mercy from someone he had been taught to hate. His finger tightened on the trigger. Turner saw the movement and prepared to fire. The next few seconds would determine whether Matthews lived or died, whether he spent his life in prison or ended it in disgrace on a Mars colony street. Turner's finger was on his trigger, ready to fire if Matthews made one more threatening move. The tension in the air was so thick that people in the crowd were holding their breath. Everyone knew that the next few seconds would change everything. But at that critical moment, something unexpected happened. Detective Sam Miller, who had just arrived on the scene, called out from behind Matthews. "Derek, think about your family," Miller shouted. "Think about your children. Do not make them grow up knowing their father died as a racist killer." Matthews froze. He did have 2 young children back on Earth. He had not thought about them during this entire confrontation. His racism had consumed his mind so completely that he had forgotten about the innocent lives that would be destroyed if he pulled that trigger. Turner saw the hesitation and pressed his advantage. "Matthews, you have children. Do not make them pay for your mistakes. Put the weapon down and surrender. You can still live to see them again." Matthews's hand began to shake. The weight of what he was doing finally hit him. He was not just threatening one man, he was destroying his own family. His children would grow up knowing that their father was a racist who tried to kill a federal judge. Rivera sensed the change in Matthews and spoke gently. "Officer, your children need their father. They need him to be alive and to learn from his mistakes. It is not too late to choose a different path." Slowly, very slowly, Matthews began to lower his weapon. His face was twisted with confusion and pain, as years of hatred battled against basic human decency. The crowd watched in silence as this internal war played out on his features. But just as Matthews was about to surrender, Captain Blake arrived, on the scene. Blake saw what was happening and panicked. If Matthews surrendered and confessed, Blake's own corruption would be exposed. He could not let that happen. "Matthews, do not listen to them," Blake shouted. "They are trying to trick you. Shoot that criminal and let us get out of here." This command from his corrupt supervisor snapped Matthews back into his racist mindset. He raised his weapon again, pointing it directly at Rivera's heart. Turner had no choice. He fired his weapon. The plasma blast hit Matthews in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying across the street. Matthews collapsed to the ground, screaming in pain, but still alive. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Justice had been served, and no innocent person had been killed. Rivera was safe, and Matthews would live to face trial for his crimes. Turner and 2 other federal marshals quickly moved to secure Matthews and provide medical attention. At the same time, other marshals arrested Captain Blake, who had just made himself an accessory to the crime by ordering Matthews to shoot a federal judge. Rivera knelt down beside Matthews, who was bleeding and crying on the ground. Despite everything that had happened, Rivera felt compassion for this broken man. "Officer Matthews, you are going to be okay," Rivera said gently. "The medical team will take good care of you, and maybe during your time in prison you will have a chance to learn that hatred only destroys the person who carries it." Matthews looked up at Rivera through his tears. For the first time in years, he saw past the color of Rivera's skin and recognized him as a fellow human being. The realization of what he had almost done hit him like a physical blow. "I am sorry," Matthews whispered. "I am so sorry. I do not know why I became this way." Rivera placed a hand on Matthews's uninjured shoulder. "Hatred is learned, Officer Matthews, but it can also be unlearned. Use your time in prison to become a better man." The medical team arrived and began treating Matthew's wound. As they loaded him into the ambulance, he continued to stare at Rivera with a mixture of shame and amazement. A man he had tried to kill was showing him kindness in his darkest moment. Turner approached Rivera as the ambulance drove away. "Judge Rivera, are you certain you are not injured?" Rivera smiled and shook his head. "I am fine, Marshal Turner. Thank you for your quick response. The Federal Justice Network worked exactly as it was designed to." Turner nodded. "Sir, the investigation into the Mars Colony Police Department has already begun. We have evidence of corruption going back several years. Captain Blake and 2 other supervisors will be joining Matthews in prison." Rivera looked at the crowd of people who had witnessed the entire incident. They were still there, still recording, still standing together in unity. People from every background and every walk of life had come together to oppose hatred and support justice. "Marshal Turner, look at these people," Rivera said with pride in his voice. "This is the real story here. Not one racist cop, but hundreds of good people who stood up for what is right." Turner followed Rivera's gaze and saw what the judge meant. The crowd was not dispersing. Instead, people were talking to each other, sharing their experiences, forming new friendships across racial and cultural lines. Matthew's hatred had actually brought the community closer together. Sergeant Park approached Rivera and Turner. She looked embarrassed and ashamed. "Judge Rivera, I want to apologize for my department's failure. I tried to report Matthew's behavior many times, but I was ignored." Rivera shook Park's hand warmly. "Sergeant Park, you did nothing wrong. You tried to stop this before it happened. The system failed you, not the other way around." Turner made a note in his report. "Sergeant Park, the federal investigation will show that you attempted to report misconduct multiple times. You will be commended for your integrity, and you will probably be promoted when we clean house in this department." Over the next few hours, the full scope of the corruption in the Mars Colony Police Department became clear. Matthews had been protected by a network of racist supervisors who shared his views. They had buried complaints, falsified reports, and intimidated honest officers like Park. But their protection had only made Matthews bolder and more dangerous. Eventually, his racism had led him to make the biggest mistake possible, threatening a federal judge in front of hundreds of witnesses. The Federal Justice Network's investigation revealed that Matthews' case was not unique. Similar patterns of racist policing existed in departments across the solar system. But the swift response to this incident sent a clear message. Such behavior would no longer be tolerated. Within 24 hours, new training programs were being implemented in every police academy. New oversight systems were being installed in every department, and new laws were being drafted to ensure that racist officers could never again hide behind corrupt supervisors. Matthew's moment of hatred had inadvertently triggered the most comprehensive civil rights reform in decades. His attempt to destroy one good man had instead strengthened the entire human justice system. 6 months after the incident on Mars Colony, Derek Matthews sat in his prison cell on Titan Penal Station, staring at a letter from his children. His daughter had drawn a picture of their family, but his figure was missing from the drawing. The message was clear, even to a 7-year-old child. Matthews had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for threatening a federal judge, civil rights violations, and abuse of authority. Captain Blake had received 20 years for corruption and conspiracy. 2 other supervisors had been sentenced to 10 years each for covering up Matthews's crimes. But the most devastating punishment for Matthews was not the prison sentence. It was the knowledge of what he had become and what he had lost. His wife had divorced him and moved back to Earth with their children. His parents had disowned him. His few friends had abandoned him when they learned the truth about his racism. In prison, Matthews was required to attend counseling sessions and educational programs about tolerance and diversity. At first, he had resisted these programs, clinging to his old hatreds. But slowly, gradually, he began to understand how wrong he had been. The prison counselor, Dr. Amanda Lee, was a patient woman who specialized in helping people overcome racist conditioning. She helped Matthews trace the roots of his hatred back to his childhood, when his father had filled his head with poisonous ideas about other races. Derek, hatred is not natural, Dr. Lee explained during one of their sessions. It is taught, and anything that is taught can be untaught. Matthews was beginning to believe her. For the first time in his adult life, he was surrounded by people of all different races who treated him fairly despite his crimes. His cellmate was a man from the African colonial settlements who helped him with his reading assignments. His work supervisor was a woman from Asia who praised him when he did good work. These daily interactions were slowly breaking down the walls of prejudice that had defined Matthews's entire worldview. He was learning that the people he had hated were just as human as he was, with the same hopes, fears, dreams, and struggles. Meanwhile, on Europa Station, Judge Carlos Rivera was reviewing the final reports from the Mars Colony investigation. The Federal Justice Network had uncovered corruption in 17 different police departments across the solar system. More than 200 officers had been arrested, and thousands more had been retrained or reassigned. Rivera felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he read these reports. His confrontation with Matthews had been terrifying and painful, but it had led to the most comprehensive reform of law enforcement in human history. The sacrifice had been worth it. The incident had also made Rivera something of a celebrity across the human colonies. He received thousands of letters from people thanking him for his courage and dignity in the face of hatred. Children wrote to him saying they wanted to be judges when they grew up. Young lawyers applied to work in his court. But Rivera was most proud of what had happened in New Angeles Mars Colony. The neighborhood where the confrontation had taken place had become a symbol of human unity. People from all backgrounds came there to see the spot where hatred had been defeated by justice. A memorial had been erected on the exact location where Matthews had pointed his weapon at Rivera. The memorial was a simple stone with words engraved in dozens of different human languages. All of the inscriptions said the same thing. Here, humanity chose justice over hatred. Sergeant Lisa Park had been promoted to captain and put in charge of the reformed Mars Colony Police Department. Her first act was to establish a new training program that emphasized respect for all citizens regardless of their background. Her second act was to hire officers from every ethnic group represented in the colony. Under Park's leadership, the Mars Colony Police Department became a model for law enforcement across the solar system. Crime rates dropped as community trust in police increased. Officers and citizens worked together to solve problems instead of viewing each other as enemies. The Federal Justice Network had also evolved as a result of the incident. New monitoring systems were installed that could detect patterns of discrimination before they led to violence. Artificial intelligence programs analyzed police behavior in real time, flagging officers who showed signs of bias or corruption. Judge Rivera was appointed to head a new federal commission on civil rights that was tasked with preventing future incidents like the one on Mars Colony. The commission had representatives from every human settlement in the solar system, ensuring that all voices were heard in the fight against discrimination. 1 year after the incident, Rivera received an unexpected letter. It was from Derek Matthews, writing from his prison cell on Titan Station. "Judge Rivera," the letter began, "I do not expect you to forgive me for what I did to you. I know that my actions were inexcusable and that I deserved every day of my prison sentence. But I wanted you to know that I am a different person now than I was that day on Mars Colony." The letter went on to describe Matthews's journey from hatred to understanding. He wrote about the counseling sessions, the educational programs, and the daily interactions with people he had once despised. He described how his prejudices had slowly crumbled as he got to know his fellow prisoners as individuals rather than as stereotypes. "I realize now that you were trying to save me that day," Matthews continued. "Even after I threatened to kill you, you were still showing me compassion. I did not understand it then, but I understand it now. You saw something in me that I could not see in myself, the possibility that I could become a better person. Rivera was moved by the letter. He had always believed in the power of redemption, the idea that people could change if given the opportunity and the proper guidance. Matthews's letter was proof that even the most hardened racist could learn to see the humanity in others. Rivera wrote back to Matthews, encouraging him to continue his education and personal growth. He also sent him books about history, philosophy, and civil rights. Over the following months, the two men developed an unlikely correspondence that became a testament to the power of forgiveness and change. 5 years after the incident, Matthews was released from prison early for good behavior, and his work as a peer counselor helping other inmates overcome their own prejudices. He returned to Earth and dedicated his life to speaking at schools and community centers about the dangers of racism and the possibility of redemption. Judge Rivera often appeared with Matthews at these speaking events. Together, they told the story of their confrontation and its aftermath. They showed audiences that even the deepest hatred could be overcome through education, compassion, and the unwavering commitment to justice. The incident on Mars Colony became a turning point in human history. It marked the moment when humanity finally began to live up to its highest ideals, creating a civilization where justice truly was blind to the color of a person's skin. In schools across the solar system, children learned about Judge Rivera's courage and Derek Matthews' transformation. They learned that hatred was a choice and that they could choose differently. They learned that true strength came not from putting others down, but from lifting them up. The story became a legend, passed down from generation to generation as an example of humanity's greatest achievement, not the conquest of space or the development of advanced technology, but the conquest of hatred and the development of true justice for all.